You are standing in a bakery in Holmes County, Ohio, at 4 in the morning. There is no electricity. The only light comes from a wood-burning oven that has been running since midnight. A man named Amos Yoder is pulling a loaf of bread from that oven with a long-handled wooden peel. The crust is deep amber, almost brown. The smell is sour and yeasty and ancient. He sets it on the table, and it makes a hollow sound when he taps the bottom. That sound means it is done. That sound means every bacterium in that dough has spent the last 18 hours doing something to that flour that no commercial bakery in America does anymore. Something so fundamental to human nutrition that 3 generations of your family stopped eating bread without understanding why. And the industrial baking industry, a $12 billion a year business in the United States alone, has known the exact reason since 1961. That was the year they chose speed over you. Here is the number: 17. That is how many hours the minimum fermentation time is in a traditional long fermentation sourdough before the dough is ready to bake. Most commercial bread in the United States is produced from raw flour to sliced packaged loaf in 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours. The process that does this is called the Chorleywood Bread Process, developed in 1961 at the British Baking Industries Research Association in Chorleywood, Hertfordshire. It uses 2 to 3 times the normal quantity of commercial yeast, high-speed mechanical mixing that generates intense heat in the dough, and a cocktail of additives: ascorbic acid, emulsifiers, hard fats, and dough conditioners, to artificially create in 3 hours what naturally takes 18. The Chorleywood process now accounts for 80% of all bread produced in the United Kingdom and is used in more than 30 countries. The United States uses a near-identical fast fermentation model, and in the gap between 17 hours and 3.5 hours, in that 13.5 missing hours, is everything your body needs from bread that it is no longer getting. The science starts with a compound called phytic acid. Phytic acid is naturally present in all whole grain wheat. It is not a contaminant. It is not something added. It is a storage molecule built into the grain itself. The plant uses it to store phosphorus for the seedling to use when the grain germinates. The problem for humans is that phytic acid is what chemists call a chelator. It binds to minerals. Specifically, it binds to magnesium, phosphorus, iron, and zinc inside the bread you eat and holds them so tightly that your digestive system cannot separate them. You eat the minerals, you pass the minerals, they were never absorbed. A study published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry, one of the most cited food science journals in the world, found that 40% of the phytic acid in conventionally yeast-leavened French bread remained intact after baking. 40% of the mineral-locking compound survived the entire process. In a properly long-fermented sourdough, that number drops to 10% or lower. The same study found that prolonged sourdough fermentation reduced phytate content in whole wheat bread by 62%, compared to 38% for standard yeast fermentation. And when the bran was pre-fermented before mixing, the method that Amos Yoder and every plain folk baker before him has used without naming it, phytate breakdown approached 90%. 90% of the mineral lock dissolved, the magnesium, the phosphorus, the iron, the zinc released, bioavailable, actually absorbed by your body. This is not a marginal difference. This is the difference between bread that feeds you and bread that gives you the sensation of having eaten. The second mechanism is the glycemic response. White commercial bread has a glycemic index of 71 to 75. It drives your blood sugar nearly as fast as pure glucose, which sits at 100. Your body responds with a surge of insulin. The insulin overshoots, and you are hungry again within 90 minutes. This is the blood sugar roller coaster that powers the entire snack food industry. Authentic long fermentation sourdough has a measured glycemic index of approximately 54. A systematic review of 18 clinical trials published in PubMed in 2022 found that sourdough produced measurably lower postprandial blood glucose than commercially fermented bread, lower at 60 minutes, lower at 120 minutes. The lactic acid bacteria produce acetic and lactic acids that modify the physical structure of starch granules, slowing the rate at which digestive enzymes can break them down. The result is an insulin response, 25% lower than commercial bread, a satiety signal that lasts hours rather than minutes, and a blood sugar curve that looks like a gentle hill instead of a cliff. The third mechanism is gluten structure, not gluten content, gluten structure. The gluten in commercial sandwich bread has been mechanically developed through high-speed mixing, building gluten networks in minutes. But the proteins in wheat gluten, gliadin and glutenin, contain peptide sequences that the human digestive system struggles to break down even in healthy individuals. Slow fermentation with lactic acid bacteria produces proteases, protein-cutting enzymes, that partially digest these sequences during the 18+ hours before baking. The gluten in a properly long-fermented sourdough has been partially pre-digested before it reaches your gut. Research suggests this is why many people who report sensitivity to commercial bread tolerate authentic sourdough without symptoms, not because sourdough has less gluten, but because the gluten has been structurally modified in a way that 3.5-hour bread has not. The plain folk communities of Holmes County and Lancaster County have maintained this fermentation practice without interruption since the 1700s. They arrived with starters, living cultures of wild lactobacillus bacteria and wild yeast, maintained in crocks, fed with flour and water, passed from household to household across generations. Some starter cultures in active use in Holmes County Amish kitchens today have documented lineages going back more than 100 years. The University of North Carolina's Rob Dunn Lab published research in 2020 demonstrating that sourdough starters maintain distinct and stable microbial communities that differ based on geographic location and feeding history, each producing a different profile of organic acids and a different degree of phytate breakdown. The Amish starter that Amos Yoder's mother passed to him 30 years ago is not the same microbial community as the starter in a San Francisco artisan bakery. But both accomplish something that a packet of commercial Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the single domesticated yeast strain in every commercial loaf, cannot. They ferment, slowly, completely, the way bread has been leavened for 6,000 years. The suppression of long fermentation bread knowledge did not require a boardroom decision, it required 1961. The British Baking Industries Research Association, funded by the commercial flour, milling and baking industry, published the Chorleywood Bread Process and made the industrial case for speed. Conventional bulk fermentation required overnight time, floor space, temperature management, and skilled bakers who understood the dough. The Chorleywood process required machines, additives, and 3.5 hours. A single industrial facility could produce what previously required dozens of bakeries. In 1950, in the United Kingdom, there were approximately 34,000 independent bakeries. By 2010, that number had fallen below 3,000. The same consolidation happened in the United States. The survivors were the industrial producers, and industrial producers cannot wait 17 hours. Then came the additives. The Chorleywood process requires chemical assistance to produce bread that holds together, rises predictably, and survives the distribution chain. Potassium bromate, a Class 2B carcinogen classified as possibly carcinogenic by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, banned in the European Union, Canada, Australia, China, and Japan, but still legal in the United States, where the FDA classifies it as generally recognized as safe. As a dicarbonomide, the yoga mat chemical, banned in the European Union, Australia, and Singapore, where its use as a food additive carries a potential 15-year prison sentence, but still classified as generally recognized as safe by the EDA. L-cysteine hydrochloride, mono and diglycerides, calcium propionate, and a range of enzyme treatments applied to the flour before processing that, because they are classified as processing aids rather than ingredients, do not legally need to appear on any label. The FDA has approved up to 60 different chemicals for use in treating commercial flour. You will not find all of them on your ingredient list. They are in the flour before the ingredient list begins. Long fermentation sourdough contains flour, water, salt, and starter. The starter is flour and water. Amos Yoder's bread label would be 3 words. In 1993, the Center for Science in the Public Interest petitioned the FDA ban potassium bromate from American bread, citing its carcinogenic classification and the detection of residual unconverted bromate in finished commercial loaves by researchers in both the United Kingdom and Japan. The FDA did not ban it. The agency asked bakers to voluntarily phase it out. The Environmental Working Group currently lists more than 200 products available in the United States still containing it. That voluntary phase-out has been in progress for 30 years. The global commercial bakery market was valued at approximately $550 billion in 2023. The industry is not hiding the additives. It is hiding them in plain language: flour treatment agent, dough conditioner, emulsifier. The words are on the label. The chemicals behind them are not. Here is exactly how Amos Yoder's bread is made, and how you can make it with nothing that is not already in your kitchen. You need flour, water, salt, and a starter. The starter is the foundation. If you do not have one, make one. Equal parts by weight of whole wheat flour and water, mixed in a clean jar, left at room temperature, fed with fresh flour and water every 24 hours. Within 5 to 7 days, the mixture will bubble, rise, and smell sour and yeasty. That is your starter. It is alive. It will stay alive as long as you feed it. This is what every Amish household in Holmes County maintains on their counter, not a product, a living culture. To make a basic 1 kilogram loaf, 900 grams of flour, whole wheat or a mix of whole wheat and bread flour, 700 grams of water, 18 grams of salt, 200 grams of active starter, fed 4 to 8 hours before use. Mix the flour and water and let them rest 30 minutes before adding the salt and starter. This is called autolyse, and it lets the flour's own enzymes begin breaking down the grain before the bacteria start. Mix everything, then stretch and fold the dough every 30 minutes for 2 hours. Then leave it at room temperature, 68 to 76 degrees, for a minimum of 12 hours, ideally 18. Longer fermentation means more phytate breakdown, more gluten modification, lower glycemic index. After bulk fermentation, shape the dough, place it in a floured proofing basket, cold ferment in the refrigerator, 8 to 12 more hours. Bake in a preheated Dutch oven at 500 degrees. The enclosed steam produces the thick amber crust that makes that hollow sound when you tap the bottom. The honest limitation: the results depend on fermentation time and temperature. A 12-hour fermentation at 68 degrees produces a different bread from an 18-hour fermentation at the same temperature. If your kitchen is warm, above 78 degrees, the fermentation accelerates and can over-ferment, producing bread that is slack, sour beyond palatability, and structurally compromised. A cool kitchen or a refrigerator for the bulk fermentation gives you more control. This is not a weekend morning project. It is a Thursday night start for Saturday breakfast project. The time investment is almost entirely passive. The bacteria do the work while you sleep, but the schedule requires planning that commercial bread does not. That is the honest trade-off. The bread that costs your body something is the one that costs the baker nothing in time. Every forgotten method we've covered today is documented in one place. It's called the Plain Folk Secrets Bundle. Click the link right below this video in the description to download your copy right now. But stay here, because there is one more thing about that starter. A detail that changes everything if you bake in a dry climate or with city tap water. And it is the difference between a starter that lives and one that dies within a week. Chlorine. City water is chlorinated. Chlorine kills bacteria, including the lactobacillus bacteria in your sourdough starter. If you have ever tried to maintain a starter with tap water and failed, if it seemed to start well and then slowly stopped rising and smelled wrong, this is almost certainly the reason. The solution is simple. Leave your tap water in an open container for 30 minutes before using it. Chlorine is volatile. It off-gasses at room temperature within 20 to 30 minutes of exposure to open air. Dechlorinated tap water works as well as filtered water for maintaining a starter. This is not in any commercial baking guide, because commercial bakers do not use bacterial starters. They use commercial yeast, which is not killed by chlorine. They have no reason to know this. Every Amish baker in Holmes County knows it because their starter told them. It stopped working whenever they used the water from a chlorinated source, and it came back when they switched to well water or rain collected water. 300 years of observation. Zero need for a laboratory. Drop your state in the comments and tell me one thing. Do you have a sourdough starter right now? Yes or no? And if yes, how old is it? We are building a map of where the knowledge of real bread still lives in America, and your kitchen is a data point. Hit subscribe, because next week I'm going to show you how plain folk communities have been using a specific clay-rich soil, harvested from creek banks in particular geological formations, to filter drinking water down to bacterial counts that beat most municipal treatment systems.